Hello, everyone. Welcome to the British Columbia Net Zero Innovation Network, which will most often be referred to as the BCNZIN during this webinar. But welcome to the Call for Solutions webinar. I think we can get started as people continue to join. We can go to the next slide. So before we get started, it's with gratitude and respect that I acknowledge the lands in which Foresight operates are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And for myself, I'm joining from Salmon Arm, the traditional territory of the Tsawwassen. So here's an overview of how our webinar is going to go. So starting with the introduction and the welcoming remarks, which is where we are now. Then we'll go into some background on the challenge partner, which is the BCNZIN, the sector clusters, and then provide an overview of the call for solutions. Then we'll go into some key dates, eligibility, and application details. And from there, we'll go into a moderated Q&A where we'll address the general questions about the call for solutions process. So feel free to write them down as we go along or add them into the chat during the presentation. And after the general Q&A, we'll do about 40 minutes of breakout sessions where we invite you to join a sector-specific breakout room to ask more specific questions about the challenge. Next slide. So joining me today is the Foresight BCNZIN team. We have Hillary Travis, who is the Director of BCNZIN program. She'll be giving some background information on the BCNZIN program. And then we have the cluster managers, including Tracy Lydiot, who's the Mining Innovation Project Manager, Joshua Young, Senior Manager of Transportation. We have Nina Bader, who is the Manager of the Water Cluster, and Jacob Atherton, who is the Manager of the Bioeconomy Cluster, and myself, Anissa Marshak. I'm the Program Manager of Innovation Challenges. So for those who aren't familiar with Foresight, Foresight is Canada's clean tech accelerator, and our big audacious goal is for Canada to be the first G7 country to reach net zero. To achieve this, we bring together clean tech innovators, industry partners, governments, academia, and investors to identify, commercialize, and adopt the clean technologies that are needed to address today's most urgent climate challenges and support a global transition to a green economy. And there's a lot going on in Foresight, but we can divide our activities in basically 5 areas. So we have an accelerator program where we support companies in different stages and sectors to accelerate their technologies, scale, and commercialize their solutions. We support companies to attract capital and also help companies to export and reach international markets. We create ecosystems in which clean tech can thrive, connecting the stakeholders in the sector using our what we call Helix 5 model. And this includes innovators, industry, investors, government, and academia. And then, as you know, we also run innovation challenges, which match industry partners with clean tech solutions. So the BCNZIN's call for solution goal is to support BC's transition to a low carbon economy. And to do this, the BCNZIN is seeking BC-based projects to support and help build out in the water, transportation, mining, and bioeconomy sectors. So let's dive into the specifics of the BCN program and the call for solutions. I'm now going to pass it over to our speakers from the team, starting with Hillary.
Hello, thanks, Anissa. My name is Hillary Travis, and I am the director of the BC Net Zero Innovation Network. Thank you all for joining us today. So the BCNZIN essentially was created to help BC and Canada towards our 40% GHG reduction targets by 2030, working within the clean tech ecosystem to help get these technologies adopted by industry and bringing all of the different members of the ecosystem that Anissa talked about working towards similar goals. Next slide. BCNZIN is supported in part by PacificCan, which is the Regional Economic Development Agency from BC, as well as the BC government through the Energy and Mines and Low Carbon Innovation Ministry, and also in support through industry and other partners throughout the ecosystem. Next slide. Our mission within BCNZIN is to help drive technology adoption, advance regional economic development all across the province. We represent not just the Lower Mainland, but all of British Columbia and how we can help get these solutions there. Really focused on how we can scale the next technologies that are really going to help us get towards those 2030 goals and eventually net zero. We also are really focused on breaking down those silos. Many of you have silos that exist in your industries. There's silos everywhere, even within companies and organizations. So how can we break those down across the ecosystem and get everybody working towards the similar goals, whether that's getting together through consultations, projects, or other opportunities, and then overarching to support societal goals and objectives. Next slide. So the BCNZIN, what it actually is a capacity building or clustering initiative, again, supported in part through government and then other partners throughout the ecosystem. We have something called a hub and node model. So at the center is the actual network itself, and we do a number of initiatives, events, research, things like that. And then we have 4 different hubs that kind of feed back into the broader network, but also into each other. And that's water, forest sector bioeconomy, transportation, and mining. And as you can imagine, transportation goes all throughout all of these, and water as well. But there's a lot of challenges that are similar in mining and bioeconomy. So we work on pilot projects and other opportunities to bring all of these solutions together. Some projects do end up just being focused in one area, but many are focused in multiple of the clusters. And again, we are not a granting agency. We are all about capacity and helping de-risk innovation adoption from industry. So helping the innovators get that next step to industry and helping industry bridge that gap to innovators and de-risk for them. Next slide. So we do a number of activities. We run a lot of consultations, bringing the ecosystem together to look at what those different projects that people are interested or challenges that are similar and how can we get projects going out of that. We are very traditionally good at foresight and innovation scouting because we have a large clean tech ecosystem, not just here in British Columbia and across Canada, but even across the world with some of our international partners. We help support the development of pilot projects, bringing in different pieces. Can help evaluate technologies, have access to sector experts, and again, help industry de-risk project development. Next slide. And so, like I mentioned, we're not a granting agency. We're about helping capacity. And through this call, we can provide up to 50% of the support for a project. And that includes some funding to help towards an innovator running a pilot, purchased from an industry partner. We can help with business case development, research support, help find partners to initiate the pilot, to demonstrate the project, and then actual help with the development, management, and fundraising of the overarching project. And then we can help with media and promotion support. Next slide. And a successful solution will be something that is able to be adopted. So there needs to be somebody, industry player or a municipality or another partner that needs this innovation, and it has an opportunity to then scale. That there's barriers, if there's barriers with regulatory or procurement, that we're able to overcome those because we want adoption in the short term. We're able to implement it. It's cost effective. It's the scalability of the technology, as I talked about before. And we want to make sure that, again, we're reaching all of the different parts of British Columbia, from the north to the southern interior to the island. And now I'll pass it over to my team for them to talk a little bit about the focus areas for each of the clusters. And I'll pass it to Nina first to talk about water.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Nina Bardo. I'm the ecosystem manager for our BCNZIN water cluster. So our big audacious goal is to support innovative solutions that decrease municipal and industrial water loss to 10% or less. So I leave that statement here, and I would like to dive it a little bit deeper. So we really focus on streamlining water innovation across key sectors, and water touches many different sectors. So we're looking at municipalities, utilities, different industries such as mining and food and beverage, or construction or other water-intense industries to support the development and deployment of BC-based technologies. Our three focus areas are water and climate, so everything around mitigation and adaptation that's often in collaboration with municipalities, circular water, everything around resource recovery and water reuse, and then smart water, where we talk about the digital solutions. And I listed a few activities. You can see them here: water conservation and monitoring in water-intense industries. Then, of course, emission reduction for water management, water loss, and then green infrastructure is a big topic for us. Drought, there, especially on Vancouver Island, we're looking at drought. And then at the intersection of ocean and freshwater, we would like to highlight that it's only ocean tech that has a clear freshwater application or a shipping angle. Then we would have an overlap with the transportation cluster. Next slide. The challenge importance. So globally, we're looking at over 10% of greenhouse gas emissions that come from water-related categories, including utilities, land use, and water systems. And in Canada, water treatment really accounts for 40% of the energy in municipalities. So there's a lot to do, and especially the collaboration with municipalities and utilities here are a strong focus. And you can see the Canadian average of 20% of that municipal water and energy is simply wasted due to leaks in underground infrastructure. That's why we're looking at water loss. Next slide. The first few bullet points are the same for each cluster. So we're looking at technology at the TRL at least 6 or higher, industrial funder, as Hilary mentioned, a pilot project, and then potentially a location scouted, but that's not necessary. For the BCNZIN water cluster, the ideal outcome for a pilot project would be that it clearly aims at reducing water loss, increase water use efficiency, or reduce water-related emissions. And with that, I pass it on to Josh.
Thank you, Nina. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh. I lead the transportation cluster here at the BCNZIN. So our call for solution goal is to support innovative projects that decrease transportation-related emissions by 50% by 2035. So a pretty significant goal, but we're hoping that you might be able to provide some of those solutions. So next slide, please. We're really focused on tackling the emissions in those harder to decarbonize vehicle segments, so medium to heavy duty vehicles. And we're specifically focused on commercial fleets, medium heavy duty vehicles, and the infrastructure needed to support and scale clean transportation in BC. Our focus areas are in charging and fueling infrastructure, low carbon and zero emission vehicle technologies, as well as telematics, data, smart mobility, and intelligent transportation systems. So for that bit there, really the data that's required to have good analysis that could lead to more efficient use of existing transportation infrastructure, as well as planning for zero emission vehicle fleets. Next slide, please. Obviously, it's an important sector as it accounts for the largest share of emissions in British Columbia. And the medium heavy duty vehicle segment accounts for a disproportionately large amount of those emissions. Next slide, please. So for ideal outcomes, pilot projects related to achieving emission reductions in transportation through low carbon fuels, zero emission vehicles, efficient freight logistics, hydrogen infrastructure, and urban planning for zero emission vehicles would be in scope, as well as pilot projects related to smart grid integration for zero emission vehicles, grid resilience and reliability, vehicle to grid integration, distributed energy resource management systems, energy storage solutions, and grid cybersecurity. And with that, I believe I'm passing it off to the mining cluster. Tracy.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Lydiot. I'm the Mining Innovation Program Manager, and our call for solutions for mining is to support innovative projects that will connect 100% of active BC's mines to clean energy systems. And in our cluster, as many of you know, mining has a very complex and long life cycle. From exploration all the way through to mine remediation and metals recovery at the end. And so this cluster intersects a lot of activities of importance for sustainable development for mining. And so in the broader scope of mining, that means Indigenous reconciliation, decarbonization of mining operations, mine water management, mineral processing, mine site remediation, and of course, recycling and metals recovery. And then, so specifically for the BCNZIN mining cluster, our areas of focus right now are looking at decarbonization and carbon capture and storage activities, mineral processing innovation, critical minerals, the workforce of the future. Of course, we can't achieve any of these goals without people to do it. Also First Nations collaboration, and then any places that we can support with regulatory innovation. Why is this important? Well, this challenge we feel is really important because there's a very heavy diesel reliance in the mining sector, and any of you that are working in this space in innovators was probably well aware of that. Mining locations, specifically also in British Columbia, have very challenging terrain that many of these projects are located in. They don't have easy access to BC's hydroelectric power system. Decarbonization plans are required. We have an output-based pricing system for industrial emitters in BC. And recently, there's also been a new net zero emissions policy that is also putting pressure. And all of this work is very slow to adopt. And based on 2021 numbers, mining accounts for at least 7% of the GHG emissions. So our challenge outcomes, as Nina shared, so I guess this will be a bit of a reminder, we're looking for technologies at a TRL of at least 6 or higher that have an industrial funder or have an operating and profitable company. You've had a past pilot or a planned pilot, and maybe you have a potential location scouted or need support in some of the areas that Hillary had mentioned earlier in the call. And our ideal outcome for this mining for our cluster is that we have pilots demonstrating clean energy systems that have the potential to rapidly decarbonize mine operations and also reduce the reliance on diesel fuel. And with that, we'll pass it over to Jacob for the forest bioeconomy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob, and I manage the BCNZIN Bioeconomy cluster. So our goal is here. It's pretty comprehensive, but it's about as long as challenging as the forest sector itself. But we're supporting innovative projects that lead to a competitive, valuable, and net zero forest sector through increased revenues generated through wildfire resiliency, sustainable value-add manufacturing, and net zero operations by more than 20%. A little bit of a background, as I mentioned, the forest sector is pretty comprehensive and is going through a transformative phase right now. So with that, we're focusing on a lot of different areas to hopefully accommodate some of that varied challenges they're experiencing. The 3 main challenges we kind of identified were access to economically available fiber, frequent policy and regulatory changes, and significant capital required for transformation. That being said, our areas of focus include enhancing forest management, First Nations collaborations, innovative approaches to access economic fiber, increasing fiber utilization, mill asset and site transformation, new end user markets, supply chain optimization, value-added products, and wildfire mitigation solutions. The importance of this challenge, forestry is a huge contributor to our GDP, both in BC and across Canada, with 13 billion in BC, and it drives 15% of our province's economic activity. This also supports 340 communities and 120 Indigenous nations and organizations. The industry also accounts for 5% of the province's GHG emissions, and while much work has already been done to help squash this and lower it, there's still some work that needs to be done in order to bring everyone together and tackle some of these goals in value-added products and utilizing our residuals to the best of our abilities. Ideal outcomes. So we have two main focus areas for our pilot projects. The first is relating to the use of forestry or forest residual feedstock that create value-added opportunities within the province. This includes projects that increase the utilization and access of these feedstocks, and pilot projects relating to active partnerships with forestry companies or groups or First Nations or communities reliant on the sector that see partners growing their revenues, economies while reducing emissions and driving innovation in the sector. I think with that, I'm passing it back off to someone else on our team.
Perfect. Thanks, Jacob. And thank you to the whole BCN team for providing that context to the call for solutions. So our next, we'll just go over the key dates. The challenge launched actually 2 weeks ago on October 10th. So applications are currently being accepted. Today is obviously November 2nd, and we are all here at the informational webinar. The submission window closes December 1st. And after that, there will be an evaluation period that's carried out by our review committee. And the reviewers will select a winner or winners. And then the announcement of those winners will be in January of 2024. So here is the eligibility criteria that's required for your project to be considered for evaluation. So as Tracy and Nina already mentioned, the technology has to be at least TRL 6. The project must be carried out in BC or take place in BC. Since our goal is to transition BC to a low carbon economy, the project should have emission reduction potential. We're looking to support cross ecosystem collaboration. So a project that brings multiple partners together would be perfect. And lastly, the project has a potential buyer, provides economic development, or demonstrates a clear pathway to adoption. And one other point I want to make here is that the funding cannot go towards CapEx. So the focus is to capacity build and de-risk projects, and therefore the funding will only go or cannot go towards capital expenditures. And finally, here are some tips for the application. Make sure you fulfill the eligibility requirements. Please don't wait until the deadline to submit your application. There's always a risk of like some unexpected technical problems that could cause you to delay your application. And a note on that, the application platform will automatically close at 11:59 p.m. and that is Pacific time. Please use clear language in your technical description and of your technology or your project. Explain all the work that has been carried out to date to progress the technology. And lastly, provide data evidence where applicable to support any qualitative descriptions. So that wraps up the informational portion of the webinar. We now ask or invite you to ask any general questions that you have about the challenge process. And as we mentioned earlier, we will have the breakout sessions following this general Q&A where you can ask more industry or sector specific questions. So you can feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself to ask your questions.
Maybe I'll answer one that's in the chat first. So Abby Stokes asked, is this a yearly program? The way the funding works right now, we have funding for this year and next year. So we will consider whether we do another call next year, just depending on how much input. But there's always an opportunity to reach out to us here at the BC Net Zero Innovation next year, and we can talk about potential opportunities to do projects then. Is the support available to BC companies with global opportunities, or must the actual pilot demo and onward construction all be in British Columbia? If there is a portion of the project that happens in British Columbia and it's a BC company, such as the research or the feasibility or things like that, but the ultimate project is an export and happens in another country, there is a potential for it to be funded through this. There was a question about if it's between two different clusters, which one it should apply for. It's okay to apply to either or. I think Tracy responded to that. So it's a question about the funding. So yes, the language on the website, I apologize, could be a little bit clearer, that we could award up to 50% of the support of the project. So some of that can go towards a project. So say an industry partner, an innovator and an industry partner are coming forward, and the industry partner is going to do a pilot. We can help support some of the contracting of the pilot, so contracting the innovator to do part of the project, but it's not a pure cash flow. So we will fix and add clear language to the website. It is not available for CapEx, and the up to 50% matching is not just cash. Again, it's some of the different supports such as research, feasibility study, scouting, comms and marketing supports and things like that. And another thing to clarify, the way our funding works with our government contract is that the funding for this project to match has to flow through Foresight.
There's a question here about explaining the parts of the project execution that are covered.
I just kind of did that.
Perfect.
So the contracting part to the innovator, so there's about specific parts that would be eligible in the subcontracting part. It would be just us contracting the innovator to do the actual pilot for part of the funding. So it would be up to them within what they've been contracted to do to utilize that funding to purchase what they need to. So all of the funding needs to flow through Foresight from an industry partner or an academic partner or another organization or group like that. We cannot use government to government matching for our funding. So if you were given some money, for example, through IFIT, the money can't go straight from IFIT to us. It would need to go to you. And as long as the funding is coming from you, there's no stacking limit on us. But the max that we can match up to any supports is up to 50% of the project cost. And that matching includes, you know, some of the internal work that we would do in Foresight, whether that be the research or the feasibility or the business development or the marketing and research, but also the subcontracting parts. How many winners per category do you anticipate? We would likely have one per cluster, depending on what was put in, but there's no official amount. We're going to look at the projects that have been put into and review them and see what the opportunity is from there. Glenn, I recommend asking your question in the breakouts for clarity for everybody. Pick up what we'll do after this general Q&A is for more specific questions, go into a breakout, whether that be with the mining, water, transportation, or bioeconomy, and then you can get into more specifics about projects. Does the project itself need to reduce CO2 emissions? So it just has to show the potential that it ultimately is working towards that. Obviously, in the water case, that will not be always, CO2 emissions is not going to be the big pull for some of the water technologies, but for the other ones, we are looking for the potential for long term. So this might be an initial project that does not actually have any emissions reductions tied to the actual project itself because it's earlier stage research or pilot, but in the longer term, it has that opportunity and you have to be able to prove that out. So again, we would match up to 50% for a $300,000 project. Some of that money, a preferred project would be that some of the work is done in-house by Foresight. We do some of the feasibility, we do some of the research, we do some of the report. We can do some of the marketing. If we need to do searching for other partners or fundraising, there's administrative costs to helping bringing the project together and actually running it. But part of the subcontracting can go towards an engineering work that needs to be done within the project.